Hello, and welcome to Introducing Me. I'm your host, Sarah. I started this podcast to get to know other people and lifestyles while discovering more about myself. Each episode, I'll give a new guest a chance to discuss their background, culture, interests, or whatever they want to talk about to help increase all of our own worldviews. Today, I would like to introduce you to Dave. He has 23 years in the fire service, which comes with a lot of different experiences, PTSD, and so much more. So I'm excited to hear a little bit about Dave's life and just hear the stories that he has to share. So thank you so much for being here, Dave. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
All right. Well, thank you for having me on, Sarah. Um, like you said, I've got 23 years. Uh, I'm retired now from the fire service. I retired after 23 years. Um, I, with the PTSD bill in the state of Florida, I ended up filing a workers' comp claim um, in order to receive treatment for PTSD. Uh, Prior to July of 2019, there wasn't any coverage in that sense, and uh, firefighters, first responders, that sort of thing in the state of Florida would need to use their own personal health benefits to get assistance with dealing with PTSD. And through the years, it's become more apparent how susceptible first responders are to the traumas of the job, and it can lead to a lot of I don't know, bad stuff. Say it that way.
Yeah. So, how did you originally get into the fire service?
Well, I was born and raised in Central Florida. When I was born, my father was in the Navy, and I don't know, a year or two after I was born, he got out and pursued a career in the fire service. So growing up, um, I grew up around firefighters, and when I got out of high school, I went to a year of college and then joined the Navy. Broke my leg, and it was a pretty good break, and it led to me being medically discharged from the Navy. At which point, I went back to college and then got into the fire service. I went to the fire academy, became a volunteer firefighter in Martin County, which is kind of South Florida. It's, the county just north of Palm Beach County. And while I was a volunteer there, I worked as a boat mechanic and uh, and a waiter while I applied at other fire departments, and I got hired on with a large metropolitan fire department in Central Florida, and that was in 1999. So when I got hired, I had a couple of years a as a volunteer firefighter, and that was the start of my career. I worked at a lot of really busy fire stations in some pretty rough parts of Central Florida. Fought a lot of fire. Worked quite a bit of trauma. Um, seen the worst that that people can do to one another, and over time, if you don't process those experiences, it'll come back in pretty negative ways. And there's still somewhat of a culture that it is getting better, but the culture is still such that it's probably it's a it's not uncommon for people in the fire service and law enforcement to view themselves as weak or broken if they're feeling like they need to get help. And so I can speak from my own experience that um, I let things go a lot longer than I should have. Feel like nowadays there is a lot more education around PTSD, and there's a lot more services available. As a matter of fact, on my website, I have a whole page dedicated to resources, um, where it's for veterans, first responders, just like public safety professionals. That there's quite a few nonprofits out there that um, raise money to help veterans and first responders with not only treatment, but um, there's an organization in Texas that takes dogs and trains them to be PTSD service dogs, and so that's the Good Canine Academy in Itasca, Texas. They actually uh, donated a beautiful Belgian Malinois to me, and that dog's been phenomenal. Uh, so, for some of your listeners that may not know really how PTSD manifests itself, um, they might have a loved one that's in the fire service or law enforcement, or maybe they've returned home from combat, and you know it may be a little bit easier to see in a veteran that has returned with symptoms of PTSD because their family or loved ones know the individual that left for combat, and that's who they're expecting to get back. And when that person comes home and they're not quite the same person, it's fairly recognizable. But when, just say, a husband and wife are, living their life, and the husband or the wife, either one, works in the fire service and experiences traumatic calls and those things, it's almost like you have buckets or whatever that you fill up with experiences or fill up with stress. And what happens is over time those traumatic events fill up that bucket, and at some point it's if you don't deal with it, it's full. And it can be the slightest stressor can overflow that bucket, and it comes out, and you know can be outbursts, anger. It can be emotional outbursts like crying for what seems like no reason. Nightmares, that's a pretty common one. It does diminish your judgment, and it can cause anxiety, hypervigilance, depression. So there's actually, I have it again on my resources page where it goes through the DSM-5 criteria for diagnosing somebody with PTSD. There are specific criteria, and there's different modalities for treating people with PTSD. So there's There's even stuff out there that is being researched by the United States government for combat veterans and even for first responders. I've done just about everything.
Now, for you personally, what kind of made you realize, or how were you able to say, like, I need help for the experiences that I'm experiencing?
Well, I would say that the first time that I sought assistance with PTSD, it was, and now mind you, I worked my way up through the ranks from firefighter to engineer to lieutenant to battalion chief. And not long after I uh, I was promoted to battalion chief, which that was in 2014, I believe. Yeah, 2014. So I had 15 years in the fire service working at some really busy stations. And to say that my bucket was fairly full is an understatement. And um, there was one incident after I I took over the position of chief of special operations, and my office was just down the street from this daycare, and it was, I don't know, rush hour traffic, and not really sure about the details. I don't know if it was a stolen vehicle that was involved, but there was a vehicle that was ran off the road. It crossed through oncoming traffic and went straight in to the front wall of this daycare. And at that moment, there was a room full of 4 and 5 year olds sitting down for snack time. And just beyond that table of children was a wall with a door that led into a playroom that was full of more children. And the car went through all of those kids and came to rest against the back wall. And when I arrived on scene, it was pretty chaotic, to say the least. Kind of looked like a bomb had gone off when you walked into the building. It was full of dust and just particles floating around in the air, and you could smell the smell of burnt transmission fluid and like burnt hair. And there was multiple children underneath the car, and it was a crew of 4 individuals that they're special operations personnel that happened to be training at the training facility, which is situated behind where my office was. So they got on scene rather quickly, and they had went right to work. And when I arrived on scene, they were trying to lift the car off of those children. And there's some other details that you know aren't really necessary to talk about, but you can imagine what a car can do to a small child. And there was multiple children that were injured. We had shut down the roadway, and as we evaluated all the children, we just We had ambulances arriving on scene, and we would hand them children and they would leave. And it was, ambulance after ambulance. And at one point, I was working to evaluate a small group of children, and uh, there was one little girl that she was extremely pale. Her arm was broken, was bent at a severe angle midway up her forearm, and she wasn't crying. And when I touched her arm, she didn't yell out. And then when I started to evaluate her, because her color didn't look good, I pressed on her abdomen, and that's when she screamed out. And when I lifted up her shirt a little bit, there was a pretty good mark. It looked like the tire had gone over her abdomen. And it immediately made me think of another little girl that I had ran on in the parking lot of a grocery store that had been backed over, and it was the same thing. And you know that kind of trauma can do a lot of damage internally, and can cause ruptured organs and internal bleeding. And that's really what I thought was going on with this little girl. Um, and I took her out to the front, out to the roadway, and handed her off, and then lost track of her. I tried to find out which hospital she was transported to, but you know that's all protected information. So I just went from hospital to hospital asking, and and I ended up coming face to face with the mother of one of the kids that was in the hospital, and she asked if I had been on that call, and I said yeah, and she just grabbed me, and it was like at that moment I broke, and I started crying, and I and I really didn't know what was happening to me. And it was so bizarre, so bizarre. Because here I am, I'm 6 feet tall, 200 pounds, kind of a big guy, and this little woman is comforting me. And and then she went upstairs and found the guardians of the little girl, because she thought that, because she asked why I was there, and I said, I wanted to check on the kids that were there and see if the one little girl had survived, because it didn't seem like it was survivable to me. And she said that she thought she knew who I was talking about, and she went upstairs, and she came back down and said, yeah, they'd like to meet you. And so I went up and met the little girl and her grandparents, and and I had brought her a couple of things for her stay in the hospital, and um, spent a little time with her, and kind of felt like, all right, this is pretty good, you know. She made it, and then some other parents came in and they asked if I wanted to see their kid, and so then I met the little one of the little boys that was under the car that got burnt by the engine block. And he had some pretty good burns and some other injuries, and man, what a tough little kid. And I went in there, and he was like super excited to see me, and man, it's pretty interesting. And then it wasn't long after that I started having some really bad nightmares, and and it wasn't really, well, can't really say for sure what the nightmares were about because I couldn't remember them. I would wake up and it would be so, a lot of what happens with PTSD is your fight or flight response is triggered constantly. And, the only thing that I can really kind of describe it as is like, it's like that fight or flight response was triggered at an extreme level while I was sleeping. And it would cause me to wake up. I would be soaking wet, heart racing, and I would be experiencing some very extreme emotion, whether it be like sobbing, crying, extreme anger, or extreme fear, where, you sit up immediately and you're ready to fight, or you're ready to, like, you're trying to get away from something. And it just started becoming more frequent, and I couldn't find anybody that really seemed to help. Didn't seem like they were equipped to help me. And then not long after that, and this is funny that we're having this conversation because this Saturday, so we're recording this before it actually is released, but in 4 days, it's June 8th today as we record this. My birthday is June 12th, which is, so we're coming up on the anniversary of the Pulse nightclub massacre, which occurred on June 12th. And after that tragedy, there's this program at UCF that was designed for combat veterans with PTSD. And after Pulse, they made, and this is just my understanding, I don't know how accurate this is, but as far as what I know to be true, and I haven't verified it, but I believe this is true, that after the Pulse nightclub massacre, UCF Restores made their services available to first responders, and they did an outreach to um, quite a few, or actually to everybody that was on scene there. And that therapy that they do there is immersion therapy, which is pretty rough. I went through the program twice, actually. The first time I went through it, it was fairly a fairly new program, and there was a couple of ways that you could approach treatment, where it was like you would go and visit the office a couple of times a week. And then there was the intensive outpatient program that you would go every day, all day long, for 3 weeks. And uh, I ended up doing that program as well. But initially, what I did was the 2 to 3 times a week, and um, felt like I did pretty good, and kind of got my feet back under me. But you go back to work, and in 2019, I had accumulated 5 more years of traumatic calls, running the gambit from traumatic deaths, animal attacks, child abuse, like pretty bad. So, I believe that there are individuals that seem to be better equipped to process those types of calls, and I'm I don't know what it is that makes them so resilient, because I'm not one of them. Yeah, I've carried around a lot of messed up stuff, and even after doing years now of therapy and treatment, that um, different modalities, EMDR, cognitive behavioral therapy, hypnotherapy, like they tried everything, and everything has its place. Um, they all help in their own way, but one thing that it doesn't do, it doesn't make those memories go away, and it just helps you better. It helps you to be better equipped to handle those thoughts. I know of individuals that choose not to get help because they feel like, well, I've done this and it didn't help me at all. You know, I'm just, you know, I'm just screwed. This is how I'm going to feel forever. And they end up feeling broken and kind of lost. And I can tell you that I felt that way before. Um, and it's kind of, well, I was leading into that. And in 2019, there was several calls that I went on that were pretty bad. And they involved extremely traumatic deaths. It's not so much seeing that stuff, but when you see a family member respond to that loss, and there's a sound that people make when that reality hits them, and it's guttural and primal, and it'll stay with you for the rest of your life. And I've heard grown men make that sound, and I've heard teenage girls make that sound. And it's the same. Maybe a different pitch, but it's the same, and it's horrible. And so it was around August of 2019 that I started trying to get some additional help. Because I was like, man, I've already gone through all this treatment. I'm supposed to be good, you know. I've got all these tools. How come I'm back having nightmares and back just, making bad decisions? You can, like, it definitely, um, you end up finding things that make you feel better or help you, you know, uh, dull that those bad feelings. It can be drinking, it can be drugs, it can be sex, it can be, you know, just like self-destructive behavior, chasing adrenaline. Some people just work all the time. And, in the fire service, if you're running from thinking about that stuff by working more, you're exposing yourself to more of those events. And so it just, you're just delaying the inevitable. And I did it. I made some poor decisions. There was some self destructive behavior towards the end of my career. And, and I just, I hope that anybody listening to this can maybe recognize earlier than I did. And if they are making poor decisions that maybe seem out of character, can be a pretty good indicator that you're suffering from PTSD. And you there's a lot of resources out there that can help. And there is no shame in it. I've I've got my podcast from Members to Excellence that is I interview veterans and first responders, and talk to some amazing people that have suffered for a long time with PTSD, only to go, you know what? It's not a sign of weakness to like really admit that you need help. It takes, especially in the environment of public safety and the armed forces, it does take a little more courage to admit that you need help and actually get the help you need. And then not only that, but to talk to other people about it. Because you're kind of putting yourself out there. I feel that, I missed out on another promotion because of some of my decisions and maybe some of my behavior. So I do talk a lot about leadership. That's something that I teach. And a huge component of that is self-leadership and self-awareness. And can't expect to lead other people if you can't lead yourself.
Yeah, I really appreciate the fact that you were willing to share such a traumatic experience. Just everything that you went through that made you realize, like, hey, my bucket's full. I think that analogy also is extremely helpful. And like you said early on, there are more resources out there. People are more willing to talk about it maybe than they were 20 years ago. So hopefully people are able to be self-aware and realize what is going on, and or like if you're a partner or a friend of somebody who's working as a first responder, that being able to see different actions and stuff like that and knowing that, hey, maybe they should talk to somebody. Obviously, you know, you kind of said at one point you felt like, oh, I should be good. I've been through things, and that's not the reality of PTSD and not the reality of probably a lot of things, that you don't just kind of get better. Um, so I'm kind of curious to know, because you mentioned that you had a dog that was trained to help with PTSD, and I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about that.
So it's pretty interesting because really what PTSD service dogs do is they help kind of distract you. They recognize when you're getting anxious. So something that I had to do a lot of work on was when I'm in crowded places or um, even crowded restaurants. It was, years. I had to be facing the door and know where the exits were. I couldn't have my back to a big part of a restaurant. If people were too close to me, I got extremely anxious and aggressive. Um, I don't know if you can imagine me in a grocery store bumping people with my cart, but I've done it. and and then I leave and I'm like, man, you gotta get a hold of yourself. But, like when people are in your space and you're at that heightened level of just, man, there's no reason for you to be this close to me. There's plenty of room. Why are you? I'm standing here. You saw me standing here. Get away from me. And then you just kind of accidentally bump them with your cart, like, oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me. But what Viktor does is, and so it's Viktor with a K, Belgian spelling, and I named him after Viktor Frankl. I don't know if you know who that is, but he wrote the book A Man's Search for Meaning, and um, he developed logotherapy, which is kind of parallel to psychotherapy that Sigmund Freud developed around the same time. Well, Viktor Frankl spent a bulk of World War II in concentration camps, death camps, and he survived. And he wrote A Man's Search for Meaning, to try and help people that have gone through those types of traumatic events and maybe have survivor's guilt or really don't know like why, like, you have to find a purpose. Each individual has to find their own purpose, create it. You can't let anybody else define your purpose. So, anyways, that's where I got his name from. And he he actually helps with anxiety and depression just by being super sweet. And the other thing that is pretty incredible about him is that I talked a little bit about nightmares, and somehow he knows when I'm having a nightmare, and he'll put both of his paws up on the bed and put his nose right on my neck and blow out just until I wake up. And sometimes it's like, man, get off me. But he won't stop until I pet him. And he'll just sit next to the bed with his head on the bed and insist that I pet him. And it just kind of calms everything down. And then once he feels I'm cool, he goes and lays down, goes back to sleep. And the woman that trained him, I asked her about it, and she was like, oh, yeah, no, I didn't train him to do that. You can't train a dog to do that. She's like, that's just the beauty of these dogs, these animals, that when they connect with you, they really connect with you, and they want you to feel good. And he's just, and he does help keep people at a distance. Not that he's actually very sweet, and he would love it if I let people pet him, but he's just an attention hound. And if I let people pet him, he's just like right on them, wants them to keep on going. Don't stop petting me. And it's like I just can't let people do that, because he's there for me, and it does keep people, um, at an appropriate distance. So that's good. And other service dogs do other things, because some dogs are trained to recognize that anxiety. If like a lot of combat veterans, their anxiety comes from objects that are near the roadway. It could be a backpack that's sitting on the side of the road, and it's like, that's an IED, but really it's just some kid's backpack at the bus stop. And these types of things can really trigger individuals, and it can be bad. And so that's what, a lot of training goes into preparing one of these service dogs for a particular individual.
Now, you've mentioned a little bit with teaching, your website, you've got a podcast. So what is it that you've been up to since you retired?
Well, I am working with an editor right now. I wrote a book on leadership and leadership philosophy, and I talk about some of my experiences, um, mistakes that I've made that I hope will help other people, um, better leaders, and maybe not make the same mistakes that I've made. I started doing the podcast in an attempt to help people learn from my mistakes and learn from other people's mistakes, because there isn't a person out there that doesn't fall on their face. And it's what we do after that that really defines us. And I, the podcast is named From Embers to Excellence. When you crash and burn, there's an opportunity there to come back wiser and stronger, and be able to help other people achieve more, and to avoid those same mistakes. And I can tell you from experience, I was a very well respected chief officer, and I made some decisions that really caused some embarrassment for me, and kind of derailed some efforts um, that were kind of like in the forge. Is developing a program to help women in the fire service develop as leaders, and connect them with other women that had achieved um, quite a bit in the fire service. And one of the things that is pretty prevalent in the fire service in the United States is there's very few women. The numbers of women are getting better, but it's still kind of an exclusive culture. And and I think a lot of people view it as a man's world that is trying to adapt to the presence of women, and it shouldn't be that way as far as I'm concerned. What women bring to the table is some amazing leadership tools that, if men can recognize those leadership abilities and learn from their women counterparts, they'd be better leaders for it. And uh, you know, I've done a lot of research around leadership. I've got a master's degree in public administration, and I wrote my capstone on leadership in the fire service. And there is quite a bit of research already done on leadership, specific types of leadership, and how effective they are in the fire service environment. And one of the men that I studied, Dan Goleman, he wrote about emotional intelligence and how that is the most important factor in being effective as a leader. And there's quite a few components of emotional intelligence. And men are strong in certain areas just inherently, like, more so. You would have a higher percentage of men that are stronger in this area, command presence and, like, you know, maybe sometimes misplaced confidence, whereas women tend to not put themselves out there so much. But where women are strong is their ability to communicate, their ability to create and maintain good relationships, their ability to be empathetic with the people that they're leading. And those are some of the most important components of effective leadership. And if you don't have good solid women in leadership positions that have those traits, and work with men that are strong in other areas, and to me, it's a no-brainer. But it's like, talking about it will raise a lot of eyebrows in the firehouse. So, but for women in the fire service, I'm preaching to the choir. And so, hopefully, with my book and a lot of what I teach, things can start to change a little quicker. Because things are changing, it's just not as quick as I'd like to see them change. And I know a lot of people out there would like to see them change faster as well. So that's what I've been doing.
Now, we're kind of up on time. Is there any last words you would like to share with the listeners before I wrap things up?
Well, if anybody listening is, well, one, if you yourself are experiencing symptoms of PTSD and you're in an environment that you feel maybe is going to frown upon you seeking help, well, think about this. Ultimately, if you don't get help, it's not going to get better. And over the last year, I've had several friends that have committed suicide. And it is directly linked to PTSD. It is hard to admit that you need help, but if you're feeling broken, just know that you're not feeling broken, or you're not broken. You may feel that way, but you aren't. Our bodies, our brains are designed to function a certain way. That fight or flight response is genetics. We are designed to learn from our environment and adapt to it. And if we're constantly exposed to traumatic events, that's why we're at that heightened sense, that we're in that fight or flight response constantly. And your body can't live like that. and it messes up everything else. It causes depression, anxiety, and all that. So you're not broken, and you can change that response. You can change your body's chemistry. There's so many different things that you can do to help yourself and that others can help you do. So realize that you're not broken. Your body, your brain is working the way it's supposed to, given the circumstances. Now, as far as leadership goes, if you are in a leadership position and you have people that you're charged with leading, you should feel obligated to look out for them, look out for their well-being, their mental and physical well-being, and really seek to recognize those symptoms in them. And maybe if their behavior isn't, in line with their character, that can be a really good indicator that they need some help. And they may not be quick to admit it, but it's a good indicator. And, something that I've said for a long time, and I say it a lot, is, the only real measure for the effectiveness of a leader is the success of their team. If a leader's team is falling apart, you can, even if it's like, a lot of people tend to think that if their team isn't functioning at a high level, it's the team that's damaged or messed up. But that leader has some ownership, and they really need to be looking at themselves in the mirror, and remember that it's a leader can't consider themselves successful unless their team is successful. I'd say that's about all I have. Thank you very much for having me on and listening to me.
Well, I appreciate all of those last thoughts. There's lots of good information from all different aspects of things we've talked about. Now, with all of my guests at the end, I ask a random question to do with anything we've talked about, so a little bit lighter than some of the things we've talked about today. So because you're in Florida, my question for you is, what is your ideal winter day?
Well, my ideal winter day, I'd say probably around 60 degrees. Got the fire going out on the back patio. Maybe roast some marshmallows and hang out outside and enjoy the cool air. Because it's not like, there's maybe a handful of days where it might dip into the 20s, and in a really harsh winter, maybe we'll get a hard freeze. But I've spent some time up north. It's nothing like that. So I look forward to winter. I like the cooler weather a little bit better than the summer here. So yeah, that's the ideal winter day. About 60 degrees.
All right, that brings this episode to a close. So as I mentioned, I will be leaving Dave's website in the description. From there, you can get to his podcast, you can get to the resource list that he mentioned. And from that resource list, I will also be listing out the book that he mentioned, A Man's Search for Meaning, so that you can find that easily as well. And of course, this podcast website, nope, we're going to get rid of that. And of course, if you'd like to connect with the podcast here, our website is in the description. That will bring you to all of our social media, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. And of course, we have a Patreon for monetary support. And if you would like to be a guest on the podcast, feel free to email me. The email is there as well. So thank you so much, Dave, for spending time with me today, sharing all of your stories. It was great to hear all of your perspective. And to my listeners for taking the time out of your day to hear a new story. Until next week, bye.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And to all your listeners, thank you for this platform to be able to be heard. So thank you, Sarah.